the giant in Afghanistan, the Kandahar Giant story. And I don't know if you know, but I had Devin Larott on the podcast, the arm wrestler, and he told a story about how when he was in the Canadian military, he was deployed in Afghanistan, and one of the guys that he was working with over there had to have a conversation with a warlord, with a local warlord, and he said this guy was 8 feet tall. He said this guy was fucking huge, and not just tall, but wide. He said it was the biggest man he's ever seen in his life.
Well, I've heard a lot of things about giants in Afghanistan. And I find that, I talk about a lot of different topics. I talk about a lot of UFO stuff. And I say some things that I know could get me in trouble. But nothing makes me more nervous than talking about giants, specifically the Kandahar Giant and the giants in Kandahar in general.
Why?
Mainly because when I talk to people who know things, they're very, very nervous when we get to this topic. And some of them will just flat out will not talk about giants in general, but specifically giants in Afghanistan. And some of these guys are high-level guys that worked at the Pentagon. And they'll talk rather freely with me about UFOs. But as soon as we broach this topic, it's like they literally will warn me, be careful with this topic.
What?
Yeah.
What do you make of that?
Well, I think that the topic of giants is intermeshed with the occult. That's my personal theory, because nothing else makes sense. Who cares if there's 8 foot tall guys, right? Big deal.
Right. Well, there's 8 foot tall humans, right? We were just talking about that young kid that's a basketball player that's 7'9", right?
There's a few of them now I've seen.
Yeah. So there's actual giants that are in public.
Right.
That like play for the NBA, and
right.
They're out there. You could meet them.
Mm-hmm. But when I say giants, I'm talking about 9 to 12 feet tall. That's 8 to 12 feet tall. I would classify an 8 foot tall person as a giant as well, as long as they don't have gigantism.
Right.
That's a completely different thing.
Right.
Gigantism is a disability.
This Kandahar Giant story is very crazy because what's interesting about it is the people that I've talked to that have been in Afghanistan, that were deployed in Afghanistan, not just Devin, but other people, they don't dismiss it. They say, we've heard some weird shit about that place. And the thing that they always say is, you got to realize, like, Afghanistan is an old country. It's old and it's very remote. Like, most of it is very mountainous. It's controlled by warlords. And, look, there's these... What are those? Are they Greek or Roman, those structures that are there that date... The Greek, they look like Greek temples that date back to Alexander the Great. Mm-hmm. And archaeologists can't study them. They can't go there because it's too dangerous.
It's one of the most remote places on the planet, specifically because it's so dangerous. You can't just go strolling around Afghanistan. I mean, it probably would be easier to go to Antarctica than Afghanistan. And
it's kind of hilarious.
So the story of the Kandahar Giant.
Yeah, let's tell the story.
This story has grown into a mythology over the years. Years ago, I was working with a gentleman named Steve Quayle, and we started a production company called Gen 6 Productions. And we were making documentary films mainly about giants, mainly on the topic of giants.
Giants as like referred to in the Bible, in ancient history, the Smithsonian giants.
That's right, biblical and historical accounts of giants. So I was traveling around the world investigating giants, and Steve is known for his investigations into giants. And he got a phone call from an elderly woman who told him, "You need to talk to my son. My son has a story he needs to tell you." And she had to convince her son to talk to Steve, and ultimately he did. And he was active duty. He was a C-130 pilot, active duty. He actually went on coast to coast with Steve. They went on coast to coast together, and he related his story, I believe, with George Norrie, him, Steve, and George. And then later on, we flew him into Bozeman, Montana to put him in our documentary film that we were making. And he wanted to be filmed in silhouette. He did not want his face out there, even though he knew that they're going to be able to mark him just by his voice. So he flies into Bozeman. We meet with him. He shows us his credentials. He was active duty C-130. And then he told us the following story, among many other things that he told us. He said back in 2005, he was deployed in Afghanistan and Iraq running missions as a C-130 cargo pilot. And oftentimes they would have him fly into Bagram airfield. And these were routine missions. And so on one of these missions, he's flying into Bagram. But this time when he landed, he was met, as soon as he deplaned, he was met on the tarmac by some individuals that he describes as the babysitters. He calls them the babysitters. He thinks they were either Army intelligence or Air Force intelligence guys. They didn't tell him. But this was different because when he disembarked, they told him, no photos, no mention of this ever, this never happened. So he knew that whatever was about to happen was top secret. And he had flown classified missions before, usually retrieving Taliban guys, what he described as high-valued assets. But this was different because there were intelligence guys on the tarmac waiting for something. And it turns out what they were waiting for was the cargo that was being delivered on a forklift to the C-130. And the pilot says that the first thing that struck him as this cargo was moving toward him and his crew was the odor. He said it smelled like musk, BO, and death. And it was extremely pungent. And when the cargo arrived, it was on an air cargo pallet, which is 7 by 9. And he could see that there was a person on the pallet in the fetal position. And this individual was so large that his hands and his feet and part of his head were hanging off the pallet. And he and his loadmaster, and there were some Marines who accompanied the pallet, who accompanied this cargo, they were actually putting their feet up to this guy's feet, this dead giant's feet, and seeing how small their feet were compared to his. Now, the giant had red hair. He had 6 fingers on each hand, 6 toes on each foot. His feet were wrapped in like a crude canvas foot wrapping. And he was solid as a rock. Again, most of his body was covered by a tarp, but the pilot and the guys around him were hitting him with their fists. And he came up to about their midsection, laying in the fetal position. And the pilot told me he was solid as a rock, this guy. And he asked the Marines, what happened? Where did this guy come from? And they told him that they had heard that there was a team that was out in Afghanistan that was looking for Taliban or something. And they came upon a cave because there was a nearby village, and the villagers were bringing food and other artifacts to the mouth of this cave. And so they thought that they're aiding and abetting the Taliban. So they went into the cave, and rather than encountering the Taliban, what they found was this enormous humanoid who killed them all. And then, according to these soldiers, they deployed another team to go look for that team. And when they found the cave, they found the traces of that other team. They were ready. They were prepared, and they were able to kill the giant. In fact, the soldiers told the pilot that the giant was eating on members of the team who had killed previously. But these new guys, they took him down, and then they had a transport helicopter come in and airlift him to Bagram.
Did you ever try to find records of who was there and casualties that were reported, deaths that were reported?
It's very difficult. The Pentagon actually released a statement some years ago, which is bizarre to me. Basically saying, paraphrasing, the Kandahar Giant incident never happened. There was never a giant that was killed in Afghanistan.
The Pentagon?
So, yeah, it was a representative. It was like a spokesman from the Pentagon or something, or a release from the Pentagon.
Is this available online?
Yeah. They actually felt the need to debunk this.
That's hilarious.
Now,
that gets me sketchy.
Well, I believe the pilot because he was a very credible guy. He didn't want his name out there. He didn't want fame or notoriety. He was very nervous. He thought there's a good chance that they're going to recognize me by my voice. He was on Coast to Coast AM, and then he's in our documentary. There's a good chance I'm going to get recognized, and there's going to be some reprisal. He was nervous. Now, they weighed the giant before they loaded him on the C-130 because they have to load everything that goes onto the C-130. The loadmaster weighed him. He weighed 1,100 pounds, and they estimated his height at 10 to 12 feet tall. And so they loaded him onto the C-130, and then they flew him to Qatar. And then they unloaded the cargo in Qatar. And our pilot told me he heard through the grapevine that the body ended up at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. He said, I don't know. That's just what I heard. So this is a firsthand account from the C-130 pilot who flew the body himself from Bagram Airfield to Qatar.
Why does all the weird shit go to Wright-Patterson?
That's a good question.
Because that's where the weird shit goes.
Wright-Patterson used to have the Blue Room. I don't know if they still have it, but they used to have a room there called the Blue Room where they had all of the alien artifacts that had been recovered and that they were studying. And it was completely off limits to anybody except for people who had access, the very few who had access. And but the Kandahar Giant, that story, a colleague of mine, L.A. Marsuli, he had another guy come to him, a different guy. We interviewed the pilot, Steve and I. L.A. had another guy come to him that was, I can't remember the details, he was a special forces guy. He had firsthand knowledge of the event as well. And we're not sure if it's the same one or a different one, if there was just one incident with the Giants or if there were multiple incidents. Now, years later, this would be just a couple of years ago because we published that film, I think, back in 2016. But just a couple of years ago, and I do have to be very careful here, I ran into a gentleman who was very high up, let's say, in the operations happening out there during the Iraq War and in Afghanistan. And this individual had he'd flown a lot of missions, and he was a commander. And I asked him, we were having a casual conversation, and he starts to walk away, and I said, "Hey, you were in flying missions in Afghanistan." I said, have you ever heard about the Kandahar Giant? And his wife was standing next to me, and he's sort of walking away. He turns around. The blood rushes out of his face, and he literally goes like this to me, points to his phone, and his wife whispers, "He can't talk about that." So later on, I was able to, we agreed to meet it later on and in a very controlled environment. And he related a story to me that's the most wild story I've ever heard in my life. And I'm sorry, I can't relay it. I love this guy. I want to protect him. But it's not the giant of Kandahar. It's the giants of Kandahar. There's more than one. The military has known about it. And aside from him, I talked to other soldiers who've also had knowledge of the specific incident that I cited earlier, but then also in general the giants in Afghanistan. And I have a friend of mine who I met some years ago. Actually, I was with Lou Elizondo at Lou's Bar in Wyoming, and there was a friend of Lou's who's now a friend of mine there. And we were talking about the Kandahar Giant. I was just telling him the story I told you, and he just couldn't believe it. He thought, this is nuts. This is crazy. And I said, okay, do something for me. Next time you're talking to somebody in government or in the military who you think maybe might know something about this, bring it up. See what happens. So he called me one day and he said, "Tim, you're not going to believe it." He said, I have to be very careful here too. He said, I was talking to a certain individual who works for a senator. He's a staffer. I believe he's a chief of staff for the senator, or at the very least an advisor. And he's got a military background, special forces. And he said, I was sitting there, we're really good friends. He said, we're having a casual conversation, as we always do. And just in the midst of this conversation, I said, hey, what do you know about the Kandahar Giant? And he said his face completely contorted. And they were no longer just being happy and laughing. He became very stern. And he said, what have you gotten yourself into? What are you looking into? He said, you need to be really careful. And he wouldn't tell him anything else. That's the kind of reaction that I get and others get whenever we try and get information on this story.
It's a very fun story. I don't know why it's so fun, but it's very fun. But the question is, what would be the reason why they would want to keep something like this a secret? I don't totally understand it.
I don't either.
I mean, if there really were a race of giants that survived, let's assume that what we're talking about is what's referenced in the Bible, right? Let's assume, or at least the Book of Enoch, right? The Nephilim,
Mm-hmm.
right? If we're talking about giants, like the thing about giants is like Native Americans have stories about red-headed giants. They talk about the same thing, about
Mm-hmm.
them having 6 fingers and 6 toes. They have these same myths. Like, how is it that people from the Middle East and people from North America have this same ancient story? And what is it in reference to? Like, why does that?
It's ubiquitous. The legends of giants are universal all over the
Why
earth.
hide that? That's what I don't understand. Like, the stories about the Smithsonian are always fascinating.
Yeah.
Because the stories are, there have been archaeological digs, and they have discovered like enormous femurs that they thought were like woolly mammoths or something, and then they realized like, well, this is a giant human, and they find hair, and the hair is red, and that they take these bones and they tuck them away somewhere. I mean, this is always the myth. They tuck them away in the basement of the Smithsonian or somewhere else, and for whatever reason, the general public is not allowed to know about this. And I don't totally understand. What is it about giants that they would try to keep from us? Like, if they find a new species of dinosaur that's extinct, they'll let you know.
Right.
Fascinating.
Right.
Amazing. They find Homo floresiensis, or however you say it, the little hobbit people.
Yeah.
They'll let you know. Look, we found little hobbit people. Pretty cool. Giants, for whatever reason.
You know, it's a conundrum. And
If it's real.
it's...
You think it's real?
Giants in general?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. 100%.
What makes you think it's real?
Okay, so let me tell you why I think that this thing's being covered up, and then I'll tell you why I think it's real, and we'll go to Sardinia for that. So I, like you, have been wondering for a long time, like, what is the big deal? And initially, people in my field, especially people who are coming from a biblical perspective, the common answer is, well, the existence of giants would affirm the biblical narrative, right? And so the secular atheist types don't want the biblical narrative affirmed. That can't be right, because the existence of giants doesn't just affirm the biblical narrative; it affirms the myths and legends of every ancient culture across the globe,
Right.
including the Bible. So it's not something that's specific, exclusive to the text of Scripture. So it would just affirm all these legends in general. So the only thing that makes sense to me at this point, and the other line of thinking, by the way, would be that it would somehow conflict with the theory of evolution by natural selection, which I don't really buy into that either, because they would just say that this branch of humanoids, they descended from Gigantopithecus or something like that. I don't think it would be that difficult of a problem for the theory of evolution by natural selection either. I'm not myself an evolutionist, but I don't see them having that difficult of a problem here. So the only thing left on the table for me is that there's something very sinister going on in regard to the remains of giants. And if you study the mythology of giants all over the world, especially in the ancient Near East, you will discover that there was in fact a cult of giants, that there were cultures that venerated giants, and that there was a very particular belief about giants. And this goes back into the book of Enoch. And the idea is that this race of beings who are not entirely human, they're hybrids, that when they die, you can still make contact with their spirits, with their souls. They can be summoned. In fact, these are the demons in the New Testament of the Bible, these are the demons that possess people. This is the origin of demons, by the way, in Hebrew cosmology. So there's this pervasive idea, again, especially in the ancient Near East, that dead giants can be communicated with and can possess living human beings, their spirits. And so you have a cult of giants in the ancient Near East, especially among the Canaanites. And the Canaanites, they had actually there's various customs and rites related to giants, but one of the specific ones that we know about is called Kispam, the rite of Kispam. And there's a fantastic book written by my friends Derek and Sharon Gilbert called Veneration, where they detail the rite of Kispam and this idea of making contact with the spirits of dead giants and the veneration of giants. And the rite of Kispam was practiced, broadly speaking, in the ancient Near East, but specifically among the Amorites and other Canaanite clans as well. And what they would do is they would hold a feast, and then they would invite the dead to come and join them at the feast. So this was a necromantic rite. And they would evoke the dead, and they believed that the dead would come and eat with them. Now, the kings, and specifically the Amorite kings, they would invoke the spirits of the mighty ones, the great ones, the giants of old, the Rephaim. The biblical account names various different clans of giants that inhabited the Levant during and after the conquest by Joshua and the Hebrews. And you had the Anakim, who descended from the Nephilim. You had the Rephaim, the Zamzumim, the Amim. These are various clans of giants that are specifically named in the Bible. Of course, we get Goliath of Gath. Gath is a Philistine city. After Joshua entered the Promised Land, they drove out and eradicated a lot of these giant clans. But some of them remained. Some of the individuals remained, and they went to the Philistine cities of Gaza, Gath, and Ashdod. And so you have Goliath of Gath, who David encounters later in the biblical text. So it's these heroes of old, these these descendants of the Nephilim that the Amorites and the ancient Near Easterners are attempting to make contact with because they have knowledge, and these are possessing spirits. And so the rite of Kisboom, the kings would summon the Rephaim by name. And you can find this in the Ugaritic texts. Ugarit was an Amorite city-state located on the shore of the Mediterranean in what is today northern Syria. And they have uncovered documents where the Amorite kings are summoning, specifically by name, summoning dead giants, the Rephaim. And the idea is to summon them and then to become empowered by their spirits, their possessing spirits. Again, this goes back to the tradition of Enoch, that the giants, when they die, their spirits are in sort of a state of suspended animation, and they can be revived. They can be resurrected, as it were, and can be made to inhabit the bodies of human beings. So there's this ancient cult that existed in the ancient Near East and in other parts of the world. And it's associated with the cult of Baal. So you have Baal, the giants are thought of as the warriors of Baal. So today we know that the cult of Baal persists. I mean, the Epstein files. We know that the cult of Baal is still being practiced.
When you say the Epstein files, what do you mean? What is the
There's
cult?
references to Baal. And there's this recurrent theme of Baal worship. And Baal, Jesus refers to Baal as Satan in the New Testament. So it's basically Satanism. It's a satanic cult.
And how is it referenced in the Epstein files?
There's some references to Baal. I can't remember the exact references, but there's apparently a cult of Baal. And the elites are obsessed with some of the elites. I don't know who or how many of them, but it's becoming increasingly apparent that there's an infatuation with these ancient Near Eastern cults, specifically the Canaanitish cults. And so the reason why I'm going through all of this is because I think it's still alive and well today in society, and I believe that they're using the bones, the remains of giants in these practices. I think it's extremely dark. I think this is part of the reason why there may be a cover-up around it. Nothing else makes sense to me.
In terms of the cover-up?
In terms of the cover-up, what we were talking about earlier.
It makes sense to me that you have incredibly powerful, wealthy people that don't want to be exposed as being perverts and whatever the fuck they were up to. Mm-hmm. And there's all the weird shit with beef jerky and pizza. You know, there's these very strange references that seem to not be talking about beef jerky, and it's some kind of code. Yeah. And there's also the fact that he brought an enormous amount of sulfuric acid, like right after he was indicted, to the island. Like, I forget how many gallons of it, but barrels of sulfuric acid, which is what you would use to dissolve bodies. So it's like, it seems like there's a lot of reasons for a cover-up. If this guy was running some sort of blackmail operation and had information on powerful people, that would make sense that's why they would cover it up.
Well, that's a cover-up of the pedophilia.
Or even if it's not pedophilia, even just adultery or drug use or whatever.
The Baal thing apparently comes up on a bank file, and it may have been misinterpreted. It does say BAAL.name. But people who are digging into this say that it might have just been a misinterpretation. That's the only mention of it.
Misinterpretation?
Yeah, I mean, it's another page here shows it. Here's like the document. It might have just, I don't, it doesn't even say it there that I can see it.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly.
Here's where it says it.
Exactly where Baal is referenced specifically.
Yeah, right there.
There for one place for sure.
Bank document. I don't know if that has anything to do with the occult specifically.
But just imagine if it's the name of Satan and this is the name of your bank account.
Yeah. Yeah, that's quite odd. Yeah.
Well, that's at least creepy.
Yeah, for sure.
At least creepy.
Yeah, so you have this scenario in which, let's just say for the sake of argument that it's true. Okay, that the legends are true, the giants are real, that you can make contact with their spirits.
Through their bones?
Maybe through their remains. Or at least people believe this. And so
is there some sort of a method that they use?
Yeah, well, okay, so this will get us into Sardinia. So whenever anyone asks me, what's the best evidence you've ever seen for the existence of giants? Now, you've already cited some historical context around this. The legend of giants is everywhere. It's in every continent. And you have giants, aside from the biblical account, obviously all over the Mesopotamia, the cult of giants in the United States during the era of the Smithsonian Gate, the Smithsonian Institution's apparent cover-up of giants, especially the ones that were being discovered in the mounds here in the United States. But it's pervasive. In Peru, there's legends of giants. And the natives, the indigenous peoples, absolutely believe there was a primordial race of giants. The same thing in Central America. They believe there was a primordial race of giants that was destroyed in a cataclysm, specifically a flood. That's what the Inca believed. That Viracocha, the guy Viracocha, created first a race of giants, but they were stupid and evil, and so he destroyed them in a flood. Same story down in up in Mexico and among the Aztec, and the Native Americans, the six-fingered red-haired giants, and so forth. So there's a lot of historical context, and of course it's anecdotal, but how much anecdotal evidence just at one point does anecdotal evidence just become evidence when it's so pervasive all over the world?
Right.
So, as I was traveling around the world studying giants and researching this topic and investigating different stories and legends, I went to Malta, which is very interesting. Obviously, lots of legends of giants in Malta associated with the megaliths, and then I kind of hit ground zero for giants, which is the island of Sardinia. And the island of Sardinia is located west of Rome. It's part of Italy. It's in the Western Mediterranean, below Corsica. And many people don't realize this about Sardinia, but Sardinia has the most megaliths anywhere on Earth. It has the highest concentration of megaliths anywhere that I've been, as far as I'm aware of. There are these massive megalithic towers called Nuraghi that were constructed allegedly or conventionally by the Nuragic civilization, Bronze Age civilization. And there are today still at least 7,000 of these things standing. You can go to Sardinia and see 7,000 Nuraghi towers. There are at one time 10 to 30,000 of these megalithic towers. And some of these towers stood over 100 feet tall.
Jamie, can we see some pictures of you? I'm trying to figure out Yeah, how would he look?
Nuraghi. Sardinia, Nuraghi.
I got three different things,
there.
so I guess this is it. That's what it is?
So what is the timeline of this Nuragic? How do you say it? Nuragic?
The Nuragic civilization. It's the Bronze Age.
Yeah, the Bronze Age. So what is that?
3300 BC to about 1200 BC.
And that's what this stuff is from.
And they say they say that these were built in the Bronze Age. That's the conventional idea. And again, there's 7,000 of them on the island today, but there were up to, I've seen estimates up to 30,000, including at the museum in Sardinia. And aside from these towers, they also have, by the way, these are megalithic. So these are megalithic towers that are constructed in the Cyclopean style. And Cyclopean masonry, Cyclopean architecture is the trademark of megaliths worldwide. And Cyclopean, this is the archaeological term for the technique. Cyclopean referencing the great Cyclopes of Greek mythology, who were believed to be the inventors of tower building. And, the builders, the offspring of the gods, who were the great builders and masons. That's the mythology. But the trademark of Cyclopean architecture is that these are large stones that are fitted together without the use of any binding agent, like mortar, without any kind of mortar. And you have exquisite examples of Cyclopean masonry in different parts of the earth, like in Peru. The walls of Sacsayhuaman are absolutely amazing, breathtakingly beautiful in regard to their design and the polygonal, tightly fitting blocks, immense blocks of stone. Whereas in Sardinia, these are crude blocks. They're crudely worked blocks of basalt and granite and limestone that are fitted together but without the use of mortar. So they are built in the Cyclopean style. And again, some of them were 100 feet tall. And they had some of them were for defensive purposes. And some of them had a wooden platform that crowned the top. And that platform was buttressed by other very large stones that were finely cut, sometimes basalt. I've seen some of these stones in Sardinia. And I've been to the island a few times researching the towers and giants. And aside from the towers, these megalithic towers, you also have megalithic tombs, which are called to this day the tombs of the giants. And you can go and visit them. There's 800 of them extant today. And archaeologists believe there were many more in the past. No one knows exactly how many, but oftentimes it seems to me that the towers and the tombs are closely associated. They fulfill a function, I think, that is interrelated. And the megalithic tombs of the giants, the legends, according to legend in Sardinia, they were associated with the bodies of giants. But, of course, today you have armchair archaeologists who'll say that's just a myth. You couldn't even fit bodies inside of these tombs. Yes, you could. I mean, none of these guys have ever bothered to go to Sardinia with a tape measure. I did. And yes, you can. You can fit the bodies of 8, 9, 10-foot tall guys in these tombs without a problem. And there's two different styles of megalithic tombs in Sardinia. You have the stele style, which there's a large stele stone, a monolithic stone in the front with a little doorway in it. And the doorway is almost like a little doggy door at the bottom. But it's big enough, I mean, a young person could crawl through it. And then you have the trilithon doorway, this style of megalithic tomb, which is a larger doorway. You still have to, like a guy my size would still have to bend down to get inside. But the tombs are configured the same. They're shaped the same, these two different styles. And what a lot of people misunderstand about the tombs is the tombs were not built to house the bodies of giants. They were built on top of the interred giant. So the giant was inhumed beneath the tomb. It was buried beneath the tomb, and then the edifice was built on top. So that opening...
Where are you getting this information?
Oh, this is known in Sardinia. I spent a lot of time researching the tombs of the giants in Sardinia and talking to various experts.
And who are these experts? Like local historians? Like what?
Some of them,
they?
yeah. There's. You can go to the. You can also go to the museums in Sardinia and read a lot of this stuff. I have a friend named Paula Loy, who's I think she's the best tour guide in Sardinia, and she's extremely knowledgeable about all this stuff. She'll take you to the museum and you walk through all of this information with her, and they have little models in the museum of the tombs of the giants, and there's a legend in Sardinia that it's called the rite of incubation, and this is a necromantic rite that was practiced by the Sardinians, and it describes the purpose of the tombs. So the tombs, when you walk into the tombs, again, they're megalithic. The walls are megalithic. Some pretty large stones incorporated in these tombs. When you walk into the tombs, there's a gallery inside, and the gallery is rather large. You could fit a body of a giant in there, but that's beside the point because that's not the purpose of the tomb. The purpose of the tomb, of the gallery inside the tomb, is to accommodate a young person during a rite of passage. And during the Bronze Age, you're talking about boys from 12 to 14 years old, right? Generally speaking, and they would go into the tomb alone, and they would be sealed in the tomb. So that little doggy door that's in the stele version of the tombs of the giants, they would crawl in there and then they would be sealed inside. And there's a little, on most of those stele tombs, there's a little hole at the top as well. So it's not like they're sealed in there and they can't breathe or anything. No, they would go in there and they would spend some days in the tomb alone.
This is what it looks like?
That's one of the doors with the stele monolithic stone. And they're all shaped the same. It's hard to tell because they've been disassembled. Many of them have been disassembled. But you can see there the trilithon. That's a trilithon tomb. That's something else. That's a well. But the tombs are all shaped. You can see down there. See the picture right below that one. There you go. See how the tombs are shaped?
Yeah.
Now, that's how all these tombs are shaped that way. This has to do with the rite of incubation. So the young person would go inside the gallery. They'd be sealed inside, the young boy. And the purpose of this was to incubate inside of the gallery in order to be empowered and energized by the spirit of the mighty one buried beneath the tomb. And again, according to legend, the mighty ones were giants. So I don't think it's coincidental that the tombs are actually shaped like a womb. If you look at the view of the tomb from above, originally when I was researching this in Sardinia, I thought it was shaped like a bull's head, which would be something like the iconographic of Molech or something like that, Canaanitish. But I realized that actually this is shaped like a womb. The tomb looks like a womb. If you pull up a womb, you'll see what I mean. It looks like a womb. It's shaped like a womb. And this was to accommodate the rite of incubation. And so these young people, the idea is they're in there, they are communing, incubating in the presence of the dead hero, buried beneath. And they're absorbing their spirit, their prowess. And then the tomb is unsealed, and the young person emerges from the womb, as it were. It's like a new birth. They went in a boy, they're now coming out a man empowered by the spirit of their ancestral heroes. So these are called, to this day, the tombs of the giants. Now, you can say, well, that's just mythology, that's just Sardinian legend. The problem is, you can interview people, or at least you could, in times past, interview Sardinians all across the island who have themselves dug up the bones of giants, or encounter the bones of giants in some kind of in some context, usually around the towers, the Nuraghi towers. I interviewed dozens of people in Sardinia, most of them elderly, who had themselves encountered the bones of giants in different contexts, while plowing in fields. They pull up bones, or they would find the bones in the tombs or whatever. And it's very easy to dismiss the whole thing as, well, they're just digging up megafauna, right? The bones of mastodons and giant sloths. The problem is some of these bones had jewelry. Some of them had Roman coins associated with them. Some of them had rings on the fingers and necklaces around the neck, the collar. And they would actually, most of these were old timers, because it's not really happening anymore in Sardinia. This is something that was happening in the 60s, 50s, 40s, 30s, and back. But especially between, like, post-World War II, when the island was undergoing a process of industrialization, and they were building new roads and digging for foundations and stuff. They were digging up the bones of giants. And there's a particular church called Santa Anastasia in Sardinia, and it's in the region of Sadara. And I interviewed two gentlemen in Sardinia, two guys, who were officially employed by the municipality and by the University of Cagliari. Cagliari is the capital city of Sardinia. They were specifically employed to excavate the ruins, the Nuragic ruins, on the premises of the Church of Santa Anastasia. Santa Anastasia is a small little Catholic church. But if you go there, you'll see that even today you can see the remains of a Nuragic settlement there. There are Nuraghi towers there. It's an archaeological site. And these two individuals, one of them, his name was Giuseppe, the other's name was Roberto. And Giuseppe worked there from, I believe it was 1979 to 1981. And then Roberto worked there from 1982 to 1984. Both of these guys employed officially, in an official capacity for the municipality of Sadara, to do this excavation. And so they would be there. The protocol was you go and you excavate the ruins, and all the artifacts you find get put into the church. So all the artifacts went into the church of Santa Anastasia. And you can see this church, by the way, if you pull it up, it's called Santa Anastasia in Sardinia. And all the bones were put into the church. All the artifacts were put into the church. And among the artifacts that were being collected were the skeletons of giants. And not mastodons, not giant sloths.
Photographs of these things?
These guys, of course not. But these guys were very reluctant to talk to us. The one guy, Roberto, was very nervous. He said, we were told never to talk about this. This never happened. Again, this was back in the 80s. He didn't think anything of it. He wasn't told, go to Santa Anastasia and look for the bones of giants. He was just told, go excavate the site. He was one of the excavators at Santa Anastasia. And the whole thing was being supervised by the municipality and the university. And he dug up, personally, he said he dug up the bodies, 2 bodies, 10-foot tall guys, full skeletons. And he laid them out these ones he laid out in the courtyard of the church. And he said he notified the people in Cagliari of the discovery. And what would happen is all the artifacts that would go into the church, or in this case, outside of the church, somebody would come at night and take them all away. So they get there in the morning, all the artifacts are gone. He didn't know where they went. The other individual, Giuseppe, he also excavated giants from Santa Anastasia. Various artifacts related to the giants, gigantic plates, gigantic cups and goblets, chalices. They excavated a lot of different artifacts, rings and earrings and necklaces and all manner of artifacts. And he told me that he remembers a particular case in which he and his wife was helping on this particular day. They're excavating in the ruins, and they found a skull that was so large. He said the skulls were 3 to 4 times larger than ours. He found this skull that was very large, and it had part of the vertebrae attached. Some of these remains were not just skeletal. There was almost like mummified. And he and his wife together carried it into the church. He told me that while they were digging, they unsealed a compartment inside of one of the towers. And there's this large room that was sealed, like it was just, it had collapsed or whatever, it was sealed. And they opened it up, and they went inside, and there was a giant, this very large person sitting at a table, and there's a really large plate and an oversized chalice there, and he was eating oysters and mussels and clams that were still on the plate, and he was very large. I mean, these guys they're when I say large, they're 9 to 12 feet tall. That's how tall these guys are, and it was remarkable. He was extremely well preserved, and because apparently he had been almost like hermetically sealed in this thing, and so they took all the artifacts and the bones and put them into the church, and the next day they were all gone. I mean, this was the procedure. These guys uncovered a lot of interesting stuff at that one particular excavation at the Church of Santa Anastasia in Sardara. And they were filling the church up with so many artifacts that Giuseppe told me that he went over to the mayor and he told the mayor, "Is there anywhere else that we can put these bones, these artifacts, because we're running out of space in the church?" And he was surprised at the mayor's response. The mayor looked at him and said, "Mind your own effing business. Put the artifacts in the church and shut your mouth." So these are the kind of stories I would hear all the time in Sardinia. I mean, I could go on and on and on. I talked to one guy that was Sai Virgilio, was his name. He was 100 years old. Very, very interesting guy. And Sai had been on a site when he was a young man. He told me a couple of stories, but he told me that he was working in a vineyard one time, and they were excavating in this. They weren't excavating. They were tilling the soil to plant a vineyard, and as they're tilling the soil, they start to dig up bones, and they realize these are very large skeletal remains, and they found like 20 of them, and they were laying on top of each other in a crisscross pattern. And so as soon as they started to find these bones, the owner of the vineyard said, stop, I have to notify the authorities. So he notifies the authorities, and he came back to the workers and said, "You guys have to get out of here. The authorities are coming. You have to leave now." And Sai said that everyone left, but he hid in the bushes until everyone had left, and he went back to work in the field because he said, "I needed the money, and I wanted to actually get paid for the day's wage." So I went back and I worked, and I kept tilling the field. And he said, all of a sudden, the owner of the field came back and he said, "What are you doing here? I told you to leave." And he said, "I needed the money, so I'm going to keep working." And the guy said, No, I'll pay you double. Just get out of here. And while they're talking, the government guys pull up. And they pull up in some various vans, and they come out, and they start taking pictures of all the bones. And they take pictures of the bones of these skeletal remains that are laying in these cross configurations. And then they load them all into the vans. And then they went up into the nearby Nuraghi. There was a Nuraghi there, one of these megalithic towers. And they were inside the Nuraghi looking at something, taking pictures. And Sai said that they sealed up, like with cement, they sealed up this tunnel, this something inside of it. And then they left. And I heard dozens of these kind of stories in Sardinia. Dozens. These people have no reason to lie to me. I mean, most of these are old timers. We didn't pay them. They live out in the country. I don't know if you've ever been to Sardinia. It's like going back in time in Italy. These are very simple people who live out in the country. But as I said earlier, the bones, these giants are being found with artifacts.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm looking at a story where they're talking about finding skeletons there. They're calling them skeletons. They're calling them giants, but they're referring to statues. And
those are the giants of Monte Prada. Those are.
Those are just
statues of the giants of Monte Prada.
There's news articles. This goes back to the 70s.
Yeah, those are just statues. Yeah, those are in a museum there.
But they call them skeletons. Is the only thing I was saying. So there's like a little.
No, they're stone. They're in the museum.
I know.
They're about 7 feet tall, I think.
Right
some people wonder if those are actually
uncovered skeletons. I saw another article here which said like they found 2 giant skulls, but they're talking about the statues.
Yeah, some people wonder if those statues actually represented the anatomical proportions of the giants. I don't know. I don't know that that's the case. But yeah, that's about all you're going to hear if you go through.
It just seems insane that there's not a photo, something, of all these things, or that some wealthy, crazy person didn't get a hold of someone and say, listen, I'll give you $10 million, get me a hand. You know, I want to put it in a glass case in my house.
It
Because
does
we
seem
know
strange.
that they've done that with Egyptian stuff. Like
Yeah.
a lot of Egyptian artifacts have been pilfered.
Yep, artifacts from a lot of artifacts from Peru,
Yes.
Central and South
Yeah.
America. Yeah, there's a very robust black market.
Which is
for
so
artifacts.
wild. Like, who are these people that have these things?
That's a good question. Well, I was told in Sardinia, they told me that in some cases the bones were confiscated. They were gathered up and thrown into vehicles and carted away. Sai told me another story where he was digging a foundation for a house, he and an associate, and they came upon a very large sarcophagus, and they pried it open, and he said there was a body of a very large person inside and had it was wearing some sort of black fabric, and there were coins that were minted from Antoninus Pius, the Roman emperor, from that time. And they reported there was a local priest, and they told the priest that they found a body, right? Like, we found a dead body. What do we do? And so the priest came over, and he looked down in the pit. He said, give me the coins. I gave him the coins. He said, break the bones up and distribute them in the foundation of the house. I mean, this was,